Welcome to today's lesson on how sex-linked genetic characteristics are inherited. In this session, we will use the fascinating world of genetics to understand the mechanisms behind the inheritance of these specific disorders. In today's lesson, we will learn about sex-linked genetic characteristics by examining the roles of the X and Y chromosomes, understand how certain disorders are passed down through families, and learn about some examples of these disorders to solidify our understanding. So far, we have introduced genetic inheritance, in which you've learnt how traits are passed from parents to offspring. This knowledge enables us to investigate the more nuanced aspects of inheritance, specifically focusing on the unique patterns seen with genes located on the sex chromosomes. Understanding how sex-linked genetic disorders are inherited advances our biological understanding by highlighting the complexity and specificity of genetic inheritance. It reveals how certain conditions are more prevalent in one sex than the other, and underscores the importance of genetic counseling and research in medical genetics. Let's get started. In this lesson, we will explore how sex-linked genetic disorders are inherited, focusing on key concepts and examples to illustrate these principles. Before delving into sex-linked disorders, let's quickly recap some basics of genetics. Each individual has 23 pairs of chromosomes, which carry genes that determine various traits. The 23rd pair are the sex chromosomes. Females have 2 X chromosomes, whilst males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome. Genes on these chromosomes can determine sex-linked traits and potentially lead to genetic disorders. Sex-linked disorders are conditions caused by genes located on the sex chromosomes, particularly the X chromosome. The Y chromosome is smaller and carries fewer genes, meaning most sex-linked disorders are linked to the X chromosome. So how are these disorders inherited? When alleles for a disorder are on the sex chromosomes, the condition is called sex-linked. As we have noted, men have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome, and the Y chromosome is smaller and has fewer genes. If a gene is on the X chromosome and not on the Y, men only have 1 allele for that gene. If this allele causes a disorder, men will always have the disorder because there is no second allele on the Y chromosome to mask it. This means that even recessive alleles on the X chromosome can cause disorders in men, as there is no corresponding dominant allele on the Y chromosome to counteract them. On the other hand, if a woman has a recessive allele for a disorder on an X chromosome, they are more likely to have a dominant allele on their other X chromosome so that they don't suffer from it. Let's use red-green color blindness as an example to understand these concepts more clearly. Color blindness affects about 8% of men and 1% of women. It causes the inability to differentiate between colors. It is typically diagnosed through eye tests. Let's use an example. Imagining that red-green color blindness is controlled by an allele on the X chromosome. XR, with a capital R, represents the dominant allele for normal vision on the X chromosome. XR, with a lowercase r, represents the recessive allele for red-green color blindness on the X chromosome. Males will have a Y chromosome that does not have the allele that determines color blindness. There are 3 possible genotypes for females. XR-XR, the 2 dominant alleles, which is a female without color blindness. XR-XR, 1 dominant and 1 recessive allele, which is a female without color blindness but carries the allele for color blindness. XR-XR, the 2 recessive alleles, which is a female with color blindness. There are only 2 possible genotypes for males. XRY, the dominant allele, which is a male without color blindness. XRY, the recessive allele, which is a male with color blindness. As you can see, males cannot be carriers for color blindness here, as they only have 1 chromosome that determines whether they have it. If a mother who is a carrier of color blindness is crossed with a father that does not have color blindness, it will produce the following cross. As a result, there is a 25% chance of producing a normal female, 25% chance of producing a carrier female, a 25% chance of producing a normal male, and a 25% chance of producing a male who is colorblind. Understanding how sex-linked disorders are inherited helps to predict potential genetic conditions in offspring. It also helps to provide genetic counseling for families, a service where individuals are provided with information about their genetic health and diseases that may pass through their family. Finally, it helps us understand the risks associated with carrying genetic diseases. By learning how these disorders are inherited, we can better understand human genetics and contribute to healthcare strategies for managing and preventing these conditions. Let's work through some questions to apply our knowledge of how sex-linked genetic disorders are inherited. For the following questions, we will use an example of a sex-linked disorder, haemophilia. Haemophilia is a sex-linked disorder that affects the ability of people's blood to clot. It is a recessive allele that is found on the X chromosome. XH, with a lowercase h, represents the recessive allele on the X chromosome that causes haemophilia, whilst XH, with a capital H, represents the dominant allele on the X chromosome that does not cause haemophilia. Here's our first question. A father suffers from haemophilia, and a mother is a carrier, heterozygous, for haemophilia. What is the probability they will have a daughter that has haemophilia? Pause here to have a go. Now let's go through it. Firstly, identify the genotypes. The father is affected by haemophilia, so his genotype is XHY, whilst the mother is a carrier of haemophilia, so has the genotype XHXH. Secondly, determine the possible gametes. The father can pass on the XH or Y chromosomes, whilst the mother can pass on the XH or XH chromosome. Next, construct a Punnett square using these gametes. The possible combinations are XH and Y producing XHY, a normal son. XH and Y producing XHY, a haemophiliac son. XH and XH produces XHXH, a carrier, non-haemophiliac daughter. XH and XH produces XHXH, a haemophiliac daughter. Finally, identify the probabilities from the Punnett square. There is a 25% probability of having a daughter who suffers from haemophilia. Let's look at another question. A father does not have haemophilia, whilst a mother suffers from haemophilia. If they had a son, what is the probability that he would suffer from haemophilia? Pause here to have a go. Now let's go through it. Firstly, identify the genotypes. The man does not have haemophilia, XHY, and the woman has haemophilia, XHXH. Next, determine the possible gametes. The man can pass on XH or Y chromosomes. The woman can only pass on the XH chromosome. Finally, construct a Punnett square with these gametes. The possible combinations are XH, father, and XH, mother, which produces XHHH, carrier daughter. Another is Y, father, and XH, mother, which produces XHY, haemophiliac son. Therefore, there is a 50% chance of producing a son with haemophilia. Note that this question asks what the probability of their child having haemophilia is if they had a son. Because all sons that this couple would have haemophilia, there is a 100% chance that their child would have haemophilia if they had a son. As you can see, males always receive their X chromosome from their mother and Y chromosome from their father. Therefore, if their mother has an X-linked recessive disease, so is homozygous recessive, their son will always have that disease. As a result, there is also 100% chance that their daughters will be a carrier of haemophilia. In today's lesson, we focused on how sex-linked genes are inherited, particularly within the broader context of genetic disorders. We began by reviewing how males have one X and one Y chromosome, while females have two X chromosomes. Next, we explored the concept of sex-linked disorders, which are usually associated with genes that are located on the sex chromosomes. Most often, these disorders are linked to genes on the X chromosome because it is much larger and carries more genes than the Y chromosome. We then discussed how these disorders are inherited. For an X-linked recessive disorder to manifest in females, both of their X chromosomes must carry the faulty gene. However, because males have only one X chromosome, just one copy of the faulty gene is enough for the disorder to be expressed. This explains why sex-linked recessive disorders are more common in males. We also examined how a carrier mother and unaffected father can pass on the disorder to their children, considering different combinations of X and Y chromosomes in their offspring. Examples of common sex-linked disorders include haemophilia and color blindness. Throughout the lesson, we emphasized the use of Punnett squares to predict the likelihood of offspring inheriting these disorders, and how this tool can help understand the inheritance patterns of sex-linked genes. By the end of the lesson, you should have a clearer understanding of how sex-linked genetic disorders occur and how they are transmitted through generations, and you should be able to calculate the probabilities of inheriting sex-linked disorders given the genotypes of the parents. This foundational knowledge is essential for grasping more complex genetic concepts and their implications in human health and disease.